Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sad to be up here and speak on this legislation again. The issue of facts and realities was recently mentioned by one of the earlier speakers. And I'd like to reference that in what I have to say because a few weeks ago I stood up and spoke on this issue during statements and appealed that we would reason together, that all of us would look at this enormous moral question that confronts our nation and our state and each of us as individuals and reason together, that we would allow knowledge to rule out, that we would be saved by obtaining knowledge and wisdom in this situation. In all these stories that we heard from some of the earlier members, they talk about the extreme passion and emotional difficulties that families faced as they made these decisions, and how hard that was. But within those stories, we heard people talk about how it was their right to make a decision for their child. All of them attribute personhood and life to these babies. They even said, it was my responsibility to provide mercy to them because of the reality of the suffering that they might face. Even naming the babies. And my family's been through miscarriages and lost babies. Pain is immense to lose that. But if mercy is needed, then it must be a life. We don't give mercy to things that aren't alive. If it's a life, how can we justify snuffing it out? And this is why this is not a sexist issue. This is why it's important to 100% of humanity. Doesn't matter what gender you are. If it is a life, if it deserves mercy, then it is the concern of every man and woman on the planet, and certainly in this state and in this chamber. No matter the severity of a diagnosis or of the suffering, every one of us in here would fight for the right of an individual who is determined to bear through that suffering. When you meet somebody, when it's your own parents, when it's your child, when it's you yourself, when it's your grandparents, and you hear about the suffering they go through in cancer or with a disorder or with some other diagnosis, the passion they have to continue living throughout that, we back up. We don't go and say, you know what, it would be, we should allow you to just, we should help you check out. In fact, we're not even going to ask you. We'll just make that decision for you. It's the merciful thing to do. We don't allow that. We don't accept that. And yet, if this baby, unborn, is a human life, then we cannot ignore the discussion. We cannot brush it aside and ignore the cognitive dissonance that occurs. How can we do less for these babies? There's no doubt in my mind that the modern realities of technology and in medicine have added a great deal of complexity to these issues. On one hand, we know the realities facing a baby whose body is not developing correctly. We know those realities, and we know the difficulties, and we see them around us, those who are born with disorders and other difficulties. We see the difficulties their families go through. But the science also shows us a real, living, breathing human life with its own identity. This isn't about big government getting in the way. This is about us as human beings recognizing the value of other human beings. And let's help people deal with that difficulty, but not ignore it and not brush it off. Thank you, Mr. President.